Sup, guys? Another 1-1 day yesterday. Both days over the weekend were 1-1 for a slight loss, continuing to, like I said, slowly drown, slowly fall down this cliff. This needs to turn around, man. The one win yesterday, Cleveland, that was close as well. Noel got me there with a 3-run home run, so I guess he's kind of back on my good side after his home run weeks ago, last month, I think, against the Royals, cost me an under with that ridiculous call on that one. That was clearly a foul ball. I'm not going to get over that one. That was ridiculous. After that one, he has now won me 2 bets with home runs, I think, including the game-tying 3-run home run yesterday. So I will take that. The under that I had, surprised that Garrett Crochet gave up as many runs as he did. What can you do about it? Anyway, we'll move on to today. Talk about this Monday card. It's a little bit of a shortened card. I got 2 sides here today in Major League Baseball. I tend to look to go against, the way that you look at the Monday card, you look and see who played in the Sunday night game, and you want to kind of look to first go against those teams, although I haven't done that in a while. The Yankees beat my Red Sox, unfortunately, but I don't see it as that much of a situation where I'd want to really actually do it, although I could see potentially playing against the Yankees here, going up against Philadelphia. Philadelphia, as I just mentioned, had that loss, kind of an ugly way to lose yesterday against Cleveland after blowing the lead like that. Zach Wheeler, kind of the more proven pitcher in that one. I think he has decent stats career-wise against the Yankees, if I remember correctly, up against Luis Gil, who I think doesn't have that much of a track record against Phillies, so he might have an advantage just because he's not familiar to their hitters, but he's also been a wild pitcher. Wheeler is the guy that has better control. So you could see maybe the Yankees suffering a letdown there going into Philadelphia after beating the Red Sox in that big rivalry series, potentially. And on the side of the Red Sox, I don't really want to go against them. The Nick Pivetta, he has bad numbers against a lot of these teams, and he has bad numbers against Seattle, too, and he is pitching for the Red Sox tonight. I think Logan Gilbert for Seattle, he's been really good, and he doesn't have good numbers against the Red Sox either, so I could see that game potentially going over. It looks like that line is kind of moving a little bit lower on the total, which is sitting at 8.5, still juiced to the over a little bit right now. Interesting there because both those pitchers are good. I wouldn't really want to take an over with a starting pitching matchup like that where you know those 2 pitchers are good, but they're both bad against these opposing hitters. So it's all kind of interesting. And we got Washington and Arizona. I see some market movement here on the Washington side, or at least the cash discrepancy is heavily on the Washington side. Arizona, very public with 87% of the tickets, people liking their recent play, kind of turning it around, turning into form again as the defending National League champs. Heavily public with 87% of the tickets, but 60% of the cash on the other side on Washington. So it seems like the professional bettors are disagreeing with the public on this one. I also disagree with the public, but there's something about this that I can't just quite do, even though I think the starting pitching matchup should be an advantage to Washington, which with Mitchell Parker pitching, who's the rookie. Arizona has never faced him, so I think that's a little bit of an advantage to Parker. The problem is that Parker, he's really been getting beat up in the month of July. His numbers are terrible in the month of July. I think his ERA is over 9, and it just hasn't been good. He's faced all good offenses, but Arizona is also a good offense. So there is the potential that he does struggle here, but he should do a little bit better because Arizona's hitters have to figure him out and haven't faced him before. So I do still like the Washington side, but Parker's recent pitching has been so bad that I kind of don't want to do it. Although on the other side, Jordan Montgomery, I think overall is the worst pitcher. He is not having a good season at all. So I think that kind of explains what the public is doing on that game. The 2 games are going to be on. First game up, I'm going to be on, this is an interesting one, man. I'm going to be on the Toronto Blue Jays in game 1 of a doubleheader. This is a doubleheader between Toronto and Baltimore. First game is an afternoon game because they're playing a doubleheader, so they got to get an afternoon game in. Most of the games are evening games on a Monday, but they got the doubleheader, so they have a 3:05 p.m. Eastern start, and then their second game, I think it's at 6:40 Eastern or something like that. This first game up, The second game, by the way, in this series, the Baltimore and Toronto, they're just having to throw like guys who aren't even necessarily really Bowden Francis is having to be thrown in there for Toronto. And then Cade Povich, who is a starter and I think a rookie for Baltimore, is getting the call in that one too. That one I would kind of look towards an over in game 2 of that series. Just that pitching matchup is not something that really looks great as far as how that pitching is going to go there. But in game 1, this is an interesting one, man. Baltimore, I think, is favored too heavily in this one. I mean, they have the better offense, yeah, but Toronto still has good hitters. They just haven't really totally gotten it together. Baltimore is up from minus 178 to minus 188, but they're heavily public with 90% of the tickets, and it looks like 92% of the cash. But I think some of the reason why the market, why the money line is moving up on them a little bit, I think, is how public they are. So I'm actually going to come in and take Toronto, and you can take them on the run line plus 1.5. I think at minus 120 right now. So you could just kind of turn that into a spread bet almost at that point at minus 120, or you could split the bet half and half, minus 120 on the run line, and then plus 165 money line or something like that if you wanted to do it that way. I think either one of those is decent. Playing the Toronto Blue Jays that way. Look at what Baltimore is coming off of, man. They did just get a win against the Padres. I don't think the scheduling spot is really anything to care about here. Baltimore was about to get swept in that series, and they avoided the sweep. They haven't been playing the greatest baseball. They've only won 2 of their last 7 games. So is that going to cause them to be focused here? I don't know, because they are coming off a pretty big win over San Diego. So that could start some new momentum for them, or it could kind of make them a little bit cocky here. Toronto's momentum is actually better. They've won 4 of the last 5 games that they've played. So they've been playing a little bit better. They just swept the Rangers, but I think they're going to kind of carry that momentum into the road trip here. So Toronto is actually starting a road trip going to Baltimore here. When you have a team starting a road trip, they tend to be in a little bit more of a focused spot there, even though they are coming off a sweep over the defending champ Texas Rangers. Toronto's in last place, and they're really going to overlook the first place team in the AL East. One of the teams with the best record, Baltimore, probably not. And you're starting a road trip, you're going on the road, and you're playing a team like Baltimore. I think Toronto is going to be focused on this game, so I like that. Toronto yesterday, they only used 2 relief pitchers, man. Barrios gave them a nice 7-inning, 1-run performance yesterday, so they only had to use 2 relief men. So I think Toronto's bullpen is in pretty decent shape here, whereas Baltimore had a high-scoring game. Pretty tough battle, really, against San Diego. That game, Baltimore had a 6-run lead, and they blew almost the whole thing, let it slip to 6-5, and then wound up having to escape. And with Suarez not going deep for Baltimore in that game, they had used 4 of their relief pitchers, including a couple of their better relievers. So I think as far as the bullpen scenario here coming into game 1 of this doubleheader, I think Toronto, even though Toronto might not have the better bullpen, I don't think either of these teams have the greatest bullpen really, but I think the rest scenario of the bullpens is in favor of Toronto because they really did not use much of their bullpen yesterday, whereas Baltimore used twice as many relief pitchers yesterday. So I think Toronto has a little bit of an edge there as far as the bullpen rest scenario. And then looking at the starting pitching match, I keep talking about this, man. Yariel Rodriguez is pitching for Toronto, and he's a guy that I like to jump in on every now and then. And this is a really weird spot because he's facing a different team than he faced in his last outing, but he's facing the same opposing starting pitcher in this game, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is pretty strange. Yariel Rodriguez, though, I mean, he's a guy who's had ups and downs. This is his rookie season, as I said. I've said on the show before, he's got a 3.69 ERA, 1.26 whip. Not terrible, pretty good ERA. The whip is a little bit higher than you'd like. So his strikeout walk ratio is not good, really, 42-19 on the season in 39 innings pitched, but only 30 hits allowed. So he's been pretty difficult to hit. His walk number is certainly too high. His strikeout rate is actually high, more than 9 per 9 innings. But if you look at what he's done more recently, in the month of July, he has been a steadier pitcher, man. He's gone at least 5 2/3 innings in 3 out of the 4 starts. The only one where he didn't was a fairly tough position at Arizona, not an easy place to play. Hitter's Park and against a pretty good hitting offense. And he still only allowed 2 runs in 4 innings in that one and struck out 7. So he's been pitching a lot better in the month of July. He's got a 25-8 strikeout walk ratio, a 2.01 ERA in the month of July. And he's only allowed 9 hits in 22 and a third innings. So his strikeout rate is over 9 per 9 innings. His walk rate has gone down. He's allowed very few hits this month. He's been pitching quite well. Granted, he faced a couple of offenses that weren't that great in Seattle and Tampa, but he also faced Houston, who is a good offense. So Rodriguez is starting to pitch better, man. A lot of his worst stats on the season were he had a bad April, and then I think they must have sent him back down or something, and they brought him back up. He had one bad start against Cleveland, and then since then, he's been really good. Since the start of July, really. He's been almost seemingly a different pitcher, and he's kind of gotten into his groove, so I like that, and he's coming off that win over Tampa that I mentioned where he went 5 2/3, which isn't that great, but they held him to a low pitch count in that one for whatever reason, 73, where in the previous 3 games he went into the 80s. So they seemed like they were unleashing him a little bit, and then they kind of gave him the leash in that one for whatever reason. He has 6-1 strikeout walk ratio in that, and maybe they pulled him because he allowed some guys to get on. I don't know, but he only allowed 2 earned runs in 5 2/3, which is pretty good. And Rodriguez, of course, you know what I'm going to say, man, factoring in the fact that he has never been seen before by these Baltimore hitters. So that's another advantage to the pitcher. Like I keep saying, when you have a young rookie pitcher like this who has pretty decent stuff, when the opposing hitters have never actually faced him before, it's different facing him in a real game environment. They don't quite know what to expect, and it takes them a couple times to adjust to what he's going to throw at you. So I think that gives Rodriguez an edge that way too. I've mentioned that before with him and other young pitchers. It's one of my things that's like my bread and butter in baseball. And it hasn't totally worked out for me. It worked for me on Cantillo yesterday for Cleveland, even though he didn't do very well. But Rodriguez, I think he does have a little bit of the edge because of that. Baltimore does have a good offense, but Rodriguez, having not been seen before by those hitters, could mitigate Baltimore's offensive prowess a little bit here. So I like that on the side of Rodriguez. Then on the other side, we have a weird, unique situation here with Zach Eflin pitching for Baltimore. He just got traded over from Tampa Bay. Tampa seems to be unloading some of their guys. I think they're playing for the future at this point, knowing that they're not going to do anything this season. And Baltimore picked him up, I think, for like a late rotation type of starter here to kind of just fill out the rotation, get a guy who doesn't have bad stats this year. Probably a decent move for Baltimore, really, because they're trying to win this year. Eflin does have decent numbers this year with a 4.09 ERA, 1.16 whip. He's been pretty good. 87-13 strikeout walk ratio is pretty good, so he's not walking a lot of guys. His command is good, but he doesn't strike out a lot of guys, and he's allowed 115 hits on the season and 110 innings pitched. So he's been a little bit hittable, more hittable than you'd like to see. So with his walk number being down and the amount of hits allowed being up, I said this when I went against him in his previous start, which was also against Yariel Rodriguez, which was Tampa against Toronto, which is really weird, which does factor into this handicap too, which I'll talk about in a minute. I mentioned that means Eflin is kind of putting too many pitches over the plate. He's not walking that many guys, but he's also been pretty hittable, and he's not striking out that many guys. That kind of tells you that he's throwing too many hittable pitches, so probably too many pitches over the plate. And Eflin, he hasn't been doing as well in the month of July, man. He's got a 4.76 ERA in the month of July, 18-6 strikeout walk ratio on 24 hits allowed in 22 2/3 innings pitched, but he did face the Yankees twice, so that does have something to do with it. But he didn't do well against Kansas City either, who isn't the best hitting team, really, although they are a good team at home, and that was at Kansas City. But Eflin hasn't done that great in the month of July. He's kind of starting to slide a little bit. He had a much better start to the season. And I think with a guy like him, I think you kind of expected a little bit of regression on him because his stats on his career are just kind of mediocre. So you kind of expected a little bit something different to go on, even though he did have a decent season last year for Tampa and actually was somewhat decent a couple of those seasons for Philly as well. But I think he's basically pitching the way that we expect, I would say. But the thing about Eflin is he just had to face this Toronto lineup, and now he has to face them again. So even though maybe he's going to be pumped pitching for a new team, a team that actually is probably going to make the playoffs and whatever, maybe that'll pump him up. But so like I said with the other guy that Tampa traded, Savale, and he didn't do well in his first start for Milwaukee. Oh, and speaking of Milwaukee, by the way, I forgot to mention the game that I was forgetting that I had a lean on, that I was right on Saturday, that I forgot which one it was yesterday. It was Miami. Miami winning that second game against Milwaukee there. But anyway, that's an aside. When Milwaukee picked up Savali, I mentioned how a starter, when they want to pitch well for their new teams, they do tend to get pumped up. So Eflin is in that situation. However, I think that situation gets trumped by the familiarity aspect of this. The familiarity / unfamiliarity aspect of this is heavily in favor of Toronto here, in my opinion, with Yariel Rodriguez not having been seen before by Baltimore's hitters. On the other side, Toronto's hitters have seen Eflin a bunch. I mean, he has been pitching in their division for a while now, a couple seasons, and of course, he gets traded within the same division, and Toronto just faced him on July 24th, so 5 days ago, Toronto faced him, and he only did okay in that game. He went 5 2/3, gave 6 hits, 4-0 strikeout walk ratio is pretty good, and 2 earned runs allowed isn't that bad. But now, not only do you have that familiarity, but you have that recent familiarity. That was the second time, actually third time, Toronto has faced Eflin this year. Now they face him again in back-to-back starts. I think that's an edge to Toronto's hitters, man. They've seen him so much this season. They know what to expect, and they just faced him in his last outing when he was on Tampa, and now he's with Baltimore, and Toronto draws him again. I think that's a disadvantage for Eflin, man. As much as he might be pumped to be pitching for Baltimore and want to do well here, I think that's an advantage to Toronto's hitters. His numbers against Toronto aren't that bad, but I think this is all about the familiarity aspect of it, man. And Toronto has a lot of familiarity with him, although the numbers are just mediocre. So I don't think you could say that Toronto's hitters or Eflin really have the edge in this specific matchup. Toronto's 25 for 94 off him lifetime with 7 doubles, 3 home runs, 14 RBIs, 14-2 strikeout walk ratio, 266 batting average, and 717 OPS. So those numbers are okay for Eflin, but like I said, you could argue that they're okay for Toronto's hitters, too. There's not really that much of an edge, I don't think, with that specific matchup, one way or the other. But I think the situation, due to the familiarity disparity here, I like Toronto in this one, so I'm taking them on the run line. I think this line is too high, with Baltimore being the favorite here. Baltimore is, of course, the better team, and their offense has been hitting a lot better, even though Toronto does have some pretty talented hitters on their team as well. But I think this line is just too high, so he can jump in and take Toronto, given the starting pitching matchup, the bullpen rest scenario, basically that, all of that. Toronto plus 1.5 runs, minus 120, and Toronto plus 165 on the money line. You could split the bet half and half, or you could really just play it most of the bet on Toronto plus 1.5 at that minus 120 and sprinkle on the money line if you want, or if you wanted to just fire on the Toronto money line, have at it, I guess. And then the other game I'm going to be on is going to be on the Minnesota Twins, even though they look like they're a public road underdog, which can get you in a little bit of trouble here. But it's interesting that they're even public because they're playing one of the teams that's kind of one of the hotter teams in baseball, the Mets. So you would kind of expect the Mets to be drawing more of the public action. I mean, the Mets are a bigger market team. They're a New York team. They draw a lot more of the name recognition, and they have worked their way up to a pretty good record here. So I'm actually surprised, even though Minnesota has a good record as well, I'm pretty surprised actually by the Mets being this anti-public, I guess. Kind of surprising, but Minnesota does have the somewhat better record here. But Minnesota's got 74% of the tickets, but it does look like they also have 80% of the cash. So I think the cash is actually in agreement with the public on this one and actually causing the line to move in the direction of Minnesota. And I agree with the Minnesota side here. This line's gone down from the Mets minus 122 to minus 115 here. So I do think that might be a legitimate move based on what we see with the cash discrepancy here, even though, like we said, Minnesota is more public than I really expected them to be. I think we see the cash also coming in on that side. And I think the advantage does lie with Minnesota in this matchup here. The Mets are coming off a tough series, man. Splitting with the Braves. They came off sweeping the Yankees, which was a big series. So they're coming off 2 pretty brutal series. Big series against the Yankees where they swept. I thought they'd be in a letdown after that, but they were facing the Braves, who, of course, that's still going to draw your focus. A huge divisional matchup there. And they won the first 2 games against the Braves and then lost the last 2, losing the worst last night. But now they're staying at home and they're having to probably listen to the press talking about that game and about how the Mets blew that series and whatever. So I don't think it's the greatest situation for the Mets here, having to play 2 step-up series in a row like this. And now they come in and they have an interleague series here and they don't get to go out on the road to kind of avoid hearing all that press. They have to stay at home, kind of mired in what just happened. So I don't think that's great. Mets could be a little bit burned out coming off those 2 series. So I think that's not great. And against the Braves yesterday in that bad 9-2 loss, Peterson only went 5 innings for the Mets in that one, and they brought in 4 relief men in that one. So they did use a decent amount of their bullpen in that game. And that game was within reach up into the 7th inning, really. It was only a 4-0 Braves lead until deeper into the game when the Mets wound up really kind of just completely losing it, even though the Mets only got out hit 8-7 in that one. Tough, kind of a tough way to lose in that one, really. So I don't think the Mets are in the best spot here after that. And they used more of their relievers than Minnesota did yesterday. Minnesota, I think, is in the much better spot. They just beat Detroit, but I mean, Detroit, not a very good team. I don't think that that's a big deal for Minnesota. I think that just might help continue their momentum there, winning a series against a team that's not very good like Detroit. Now they carry it out. They are having to travel, so there is that maybe slight advantage for the Mets in that they don't have to travel, but the Mets, again, are having to hear about how they just lost to the Braves, whereas the Twins just kind of get to go continue on this road trip here and kind of continue to focus on baseball, coming off a 5-0 win, a nice win after they lost the middle game of that series to Detroit, so that might help propel them into this Mets series, give them some momentum again here coming into this series. And the Twins did not use really much of their bullpen at all. Bailey Ober went 8 innings for them and threw a 1-hitter through 8 innings yesterday with 11 strikeouts and 2 walks. Total domination. I've been talking about how Ober is actually good, man. And he is good. And he had a really good start yesterday. He's been really turning it on after his ERA was, as I kept saying, misleadingly high. He is good, and he is showing it again now. He's been really good. The Twins only use 1 relief pitcher, Theo Barr, even though he had to throw 25 pitches to finish 1 inning yesterday. But that means the Twins bullpen is in much better shape than the Mets is here. I don't know which of these teams I would say actually would be considered to be the better out of these 2 bullpens, really, but the bullpen rest scenarios in favor of Minnesota here after they only had to use 1 relief pitcher yesterday while the Mets used 4. So in both of these games that I'm playing, the bullpen rest situation is in favor of the team that I'm on. And then we look at the starting pitching matchup. I think this is an advantage to Minnesota as well. This is, again, we get the familiarity aspect of this. Simeon Woods Richardson is pitching for Minnesota. He's a guy that I've talked about on the show repeatedly. I've been on some of his games, and I'm going to be on this one. He's having a good rookie season. He's still only 23 years old, man. He's putting up an impressive rookie season with a, what has he got? A 3.27 ERA. Why do I keep saying it's a rookie season? It's not actually his rookie season. He's been in the league since 2022. My mistake. I keep saying that because this is his first full season. He only made 1 appearance in 2022 and 1 in 2023. So this is almost like his rookie season because it's his only season that he's had more than 1 appearance, but it has been an impressive season for him, man. 3.27 ERA, 1.11 whip. He's pitching well, even though his strikeout rate isn't that high, and his walk rate is higher than you want to see. He's got 76 strikeouts and 25 walks in 88 innings pitched, 73 hits allowed. So he has been walking too many guys, but he has not been easy to hit. His hit rate is pretty low. His strikeout rate not very high, so his strikeout walk ratio isn't that high, but his numbers really aren't that bad. And in the month of July, he's pitched pretty well as well with a 2.86 ERA. So he's been continuing pitching pretty well. And he's got a 20-6 strikeout walk ratio in the month of July. That's pretty good. Only allowing 7 earned runs in 22 innings pitched and 17 hits allowed. So that's all pretty good as well. He's having a good month of July. And he's faced 2 pretty good offenses during that span too, in Houston and Philly, and a couple of weaker ones in Detroit and San Francisco. And oddly enough, the Detroit and San Francisco games are actually his worst 2 starts in July. The Houston and Philly ones are actually the better starts, although both of those are at home. He is coming off that 6-inning shutout of Philly, but they wound up losing that game. to no fault of his own. He, as I said, he gave up no runs in 6 innings, only 3 hits, 5-1 strikeout walk ratio. So he's pitching well. I don't think he's going to be in a letdown spot here, man. I think you're facing a team like the Mets who can hit. Woods Richardson seems like he's stepped up in some of these games against bad offenses. I think he may be able to do it again here. And that's a team that will draw your focus. The Mets, people know that their offense has been clicking. It's been hitting pretty well. They've been hitting pretty well. So that's a team that you're probably going to get focused on if you're Woods Richardson. So I like that. And then, of course, you know what I'm about to say, the Mets have basically never faced Woods Richardson before. So I think that gives him a little bit of an edge too, because these hitters have to figure him out. Only Winker has ever seen Woods Richardson before, and he's had one at bat against him and he walked. So, oh my God, he has a 1,000 OPS against him, man. And a 0 batting average or an infinite batting average. Yeah, whatever. So that's the only at bat that any of these Mets hitters have had against Woods Richardson. So it's basically like they haven't faced him before. So I think that's an advantage to Woods Richardson with the unfamiliarity there. And on the other side, Jose Quintana is pitching for the Mets. I have gone against him repeatedly on this show. As you know, I don't think he's a very good pitcher. He's obviously up there in age. He's actually pitched well this month, though, so I've been caught. The fact that he has a 2.19 ERA this month has kind of caught me, and he's only allowed 14 hits in 24 and 2/3 innings. But he faced Washington twice and Colorado at home. Colorado's offense not very good, and he did pretty poorly against Colorado. He dominated Washington, and then he didn't do well against Colorado. And he pitched what seems like he pitched okay against the Yankees in his last outing, but he didn't really, as he walked 5 guys in 5 innings in that one and gave up 3 hits and somehow got away with that in 5 innings. So it wasn't actually that great a performance for Quintana. He's at a 20-10 strikeout walk ratio this month. So that is a bad walk rate, man, really bad. That strikeout walk ratio indicates that his ERA this month is actually misleading. It should not be anywhere near as low as it is. So again, I'm going to continue to say I don't think he's that good. On the season, he's got an 85-39 strikeout walk ratio. That's not good. He's only allowed 98 hits and 107 1/3 innings pitch. So that is good. He's been really difficult to hit this month specifically. Prior to this month, he was fairly hittable. So this month, I don't know what's going on with that. He's just been a bit unhittable, but I think it's a little bit of a fluke. I think a lot of it is kind of that Washington factor there. Those 2 starts, he did really well. But other than that, I mean, his strikeout rate obviously is really low. He's not a strikeout guy. His strikeout walk ratio is not good. His amount of walks is fairly high. The amount of hits he's allowed, like I said, went down this month, and it's not bad. But other than that, he's not that good. Overall, he's got a 4.02 ERA and 1.28 whip, which isn't that bad. But again, like I said, I think his stats this month, which are factoring into that, are misleading. And I think his stats should probably be a little bit worse than they are. He's an older junk pitcher. 35 years old, so I don't think he's really that good. And then up against, who are we facing here? Oh, yeah, up against Minnesota. Minnesota has at least seen him before, though his numbers against Minnesota are actually pretty decent as well. But this is all about the familiarity, man. Like I said with the other game, even though the starting pitcher that I'm going against, they actually have okay numbers against the opposing hitters, I'm still doing this because of the familiarity aspect of it. And overall, I think we're fading the worst of the 2 pitchers here. So I'm doing that with Quintana here. Minnesota is 24-99 off him lifetime. They only have 6 guys who have seen him before, but those 6 guys have seen him a lot. 24-99, 7 doubles, 1 triple, 2 home runs, 11 RBIs, 17-6 strikeout walk ratio. So again, that's kind of a lot of walks, but it is a 242 batting average and 680 OPS. So those numbers are pretty low for Quintana. So he's actually done kind of well against this Minnesota offense, but I still think that he is the worst of these 2 pitchers, and he is the pitcher that is familiar to the hitter. So I don't think that that's the greatest spot to me in there. So that's it, man. Those 2 plays today are Toronto Blue Jays. You could split the run line and money line plus 1.5, minus 120, and money line plus 165, half and half, or you could just play the plus 1.5 like a spread bet if you want and sprinkle on the money line, or play the full thing on the money line. I think I might do the split bet 50-50 in this one. We'll see. And then the Minnesota Twins, you can get it plus 105 as a nice underdog price. That's going to do it, man. Have a good one. Peace.